Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness But Ours.
Court, which is a film that's out on Freevee over here in the UK. Or is that where you saw it? Or
Tubi. I saw it on Tubi.
which I'm very glad of the recommendation, which is set in the 70s and very much has you have this couple. I think they're both journalists.
Yes, that's right. One's a photojournalist. The guy is a photojournalist, and the woman is a prose journalist. So she writes the articles, and he takes the pictures.
Yeah, and there's some sort of military base up on the moor near where
that's right.
Which I think I can't remember what part of the country it's supposed to be in. Possibly Devon or Cornwall, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Devon, I think. And they're basically like, there's this base up on the moor. We don't know what it's for. They won't say what it's for. So we want to investigate it.
And then this couple turn up in their white suits and they're eerily sort of good looking and well groomed and very well spoken, except that the way they speak isn't quite right.
Yes.
The word choice will just be a little off, or the usage of words will just be a little off. It is like the language of somebody who's they've just learned the language and they know all the words, but they know all the notes, but they're not necessarily playing them all in the right order, almost. Their questions become weirdly intrusive. Like, did you go up on the moor? Did you copulate?
Yes, you went up on the moor to near the base, and then you copulated. What? No, get out of my house!
When they try to get him out of the house, the woman basically throws the husband back in his chair and just screams insanely at him. And the male of the couple says, "She has already killed once. She will again." And the wife says, "If we tell you what you want, will you leave?" "We never said we would leave."
Yes.
Deeply. There's just something. It is. I mean, the implication as it goes on is that because he talks about the court and the distant who will come. Again, so there's a language. It's like the English language, or his command of the English language is not such that he can actually express. I mean, but it could be some form of the Fae, or it could be some extraterrestrial. It's not clear, but or
paradimensional even. Like a rip opened up between two dimensions, and we saw you and you saw us and you caught us on film. You took a picture.
Yeah, and we're not sure if it's a case of we are not going to let you people have evidence of our existence, or that in some way in it being caught on film, is it actually caught in a more fundamental sense? Is something of theirs trapped somehow that needs to be brought back? But one of the interesting things about this mysterious couple, is that they can inflict violence, terrible violence, but that seems to actually have a consequence for them. Mm-hmm. The female one is increasingly sort of degraded physically, and seems to find it harder to maintain the sort of her human appearance and her sort of any appearance of equanimity. So it's in some way
she starts to throw up a lot. She starts to drool. It's almost like she's throwing up her own guts. Like this pink stuff that's coming out of her.
So the actual commission of violence seems to have some sort of consequence for them. So exactly why this should be again is never really clear. Which is, I think that's a great one of the things that gives them a great deal of power. There are a lot of questions that it just doesn't answer. Arguably, it means the final kind of denouement is kind of like, well, it doesn't answer any questions, and it kind of ends, well, there's no big surprises in how that ended.
That use of liminality, though, also, it's like, to some degree, it's the Doctor Who kind of, well, we only have so much money.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about stuff a lot. Yeah, stuff has to happen off screen.
To turn necessity into a virtue, kind of thing.
Yeah, every planet we go to looks like, you know, a slag heap out the back of the BBC.
Yes.
You know, but at the same time, there's something very weirdly likable about that. And one of the most amazing moments in COD for me is the moment in the dark room where the husband finally he develops all the photos and he's looking through them and he's pouring through them trying to find what the fuck it is that, you know, has brought these two lunatics to his house to say things to his wife like, we will remove the head of your baby if you if you don't blah blah blah, you know, and threaten his entire family, and he finally finds something. And we see him staring at it, and then he's like, come over, look at this. And we see both he and his wife staring at it, but we never get to see what it is.
We see their reaction. We don't see what they're reacting to.
Yes, exactly. But the reaction itself tells us it's horrifying and numinous and world-rocking and awesome.
And that kind of been it kind of been so it could have been extraterrestrial, it kind of been the fake, kind of been paradimensional, it kind of been any of those things. Which of those it was is less relevant than the fact that it is one of them. Although, let's face it, with the way these creatures, these two were behaving, it was getting increasingly clear that we were not dealing with normal human beings at any level. But
you know, right at the beginning, it reminded me of something I used to say about dealing with my son, which was that, you know, you have to understand that for Cal, it's like he's in a foreign country, and you know, forever. It's like, and you're always going to be like that, and you know, and I've felt that myself on a smaller basis because simply being able to communicate better than he does. But it's exactly like that. You know, you start off and you're like, where do you guys come from? You're from another country, right? No, no, we're from another. From here. It's like, you know.
I definitely need to rewatch this film, and not just because we want to do more kind of a deep dive into it, but just because I really want to watch it again, and I really want to go through this again.
Yeah, I think I've seen it about 3 times now, and I did send away for it. So I now own it, which is good. Because that's a film that rewards study, I would say.
Yes, and of course another one we want to sort of explore in depth is Enys Men, which is again another film that definitely repeats. We'll definitely. I've seen it. I've watched it through twice now, and I definitely need to do so again. And I don't know how well this fits into the hauntology concept, in that, I mean, it's been created as an artifact from the 70s, although it's been made obviously much more recently, and there's nothing there that would be out of place in the 1970s. It is a place where it's basically about a place where time goes completely doolally. Stops, but it's also kind of like bringing a very old myth that's in, I think it's quite prevalent in Cornwall. It's very prevalent in Wales as well, actually, the whole petrification idea. You know, this whole that you find it in a lot of, usually in Wales, when you've got like a standing stone, a monolith, it's usually somebody who was dancing or working on the Sabbath and got got petrified. Although I think there was one stone called the Robber's Stone in North Wales, which is a thief who got petrified as he tried to do a runner with something or other. So,
but yeah, you know, the idea of the Seven Sisters, the dancing girls, the idea of people who are caught in the middle of witchcraft, for example.
Yeah.
And in Psychomania, There's a bunch of standing stones that are supposedly witches who have, I think, rejected Satan at some point, and the zombie bikers turn into a stone at the end.
Okay. I mean, I think certainly in a lot of the Welsh legends I've encountered, other than the robber stone, most of those legends tend to be linked with breaking the Sabbath. So it's of course, whether there may have been an older pre-Christian tradition, it's hard to tell, but usually it's a sort of it's one of these vastly disproportionate punishments for a comparatively minor offence, really, for dancing on the Sabbath or washing some clothes and drying. There is, I think, there's one bunch of standing stones which is supposed to be some washerwomen who basically was washing and drying some clothes on the Sabbath, and they got petrified for that, which is kind of like, fucking hell, dudes, lighten up. If you do this to everybody, then who breaks the Sabbath in some small way, you're going to depopulate the entire country and just have a load of rocks.
Particularly on a small island like in Enys Men.
Yeah.
Like, man, there's nothing left. It's just rocks all the way down.
It is a truly fascinating film. It's I mean, it's one of those ones where I was aware as I'm not often when watching films of the attention to technical detail in terms of how it must, in terms of the whole process of filming, I guess, and all the process of creating it to actually make it look so 70s. It's there in the use in the use of film rather than digital.
And also the film itself, I think, was like ends from previously made films. So like stuff that had been cut off in the editing room that they bought up. So it's like an older version of film as well.
Maybe. I mean, I know he did this in his previous film where filming like a 16mm camera, and one way you had to basically hand wind it so you'd be able to film for a few minutes at a time. So you do it in this. I mean, it's just on the technical level, it's extraordinary what he's done. But the film itself is just this quite remarkable experience. I don't know. As I said, I don't know quite how well it fits into the hauntology thing, other than it obviously is an astounding recreation of that particular time.
I think it does, though, because I mean, certainly the time folding aspect.
Yes.
The idea that something is going on the island, which is cyclical and repetitious, but and almost like you're caught in a loop, literally in a loop, but it could be as much a physics-based kind of thing as it could be a ritualized or supernatural thing. It's simply that there is no explanation.
Yeah, it just is.
It just is. Yeah, it's like, this is how I live now. This is how I live now. In apparently. Doing the same things over and over again, dropping something down the well, and measuring the
right, who just happens to be looks like my dad, but
yeah, exactly.
That's a bit better, but I think there was definitely a nice thing. I do love that scene in the chapel with John Woodvine sort of singing that hymn and her joining in, and there's like that very sort of tender smile that passes between them that feels very genuine. As I say, he's not been in a film in quite a few years. He's well into his 90s now, and looks quite it does look quite fragile compared to the last thing I saw him in. Although you wouldn't necessarily think he was 90 odd. So possibly he's just kind of come out of retirement for this one, because this is his daughter's partner making the movie. So it's like, okay, this is a family thing. I'll pop my head up.
Yeah, exactly. And and again, a very hauntological 1970s kind of early 1980s kind of aspect is the idea that if everything is you know, which we see in God, The Voice of the Fire by Alan Moore.
Oh yeah.
You know, the idea that if everything is actually happening at the same time, then if you see a ghost, that ghost could be a person. If you see an angel, that angel could be a person. If you see a monster, that monster could be a person. Any of these things are real because they're all existing at the same time. And all options are possible at the same time. You know, yeah. You know, I mean, to the hymn singing preacher, you know, is that like a moment of numinosity? You know, it's like this girl just appeared. This woman just appeared.
Yeah,
smiled at me.
Like to,
you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just realizing as well that Woodvine is an actor who's very much associated with that period of the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
I don't think he was he's not been any of the ghost stories for Christmas, although did do a thing in 1980 called Spine Chillers, which were readings of various, you know, sort of classic ghost stories for Jack and Nori, the kids' TV. So you had things like, I think Lost Hearts may actually, or a version of that may actually have been one of them. Not all of these are, a number of these are available on YouTube, but not all of them. Jonathan Pryce did a couple of Saki stories, including The Music on the Hill, which is one of Saki's least humorous, sort of, and most, you know, sort of paganly supernatural stories. It's very much like something Machen might have written, right down to misogyny. I do remember. I haven't been able to find a recording of it, but I think I actually saw it at the time. Was Sredni Vashtar, mainly because that's what I first heard the name. I still find, for me, the definitive reading of the story is still the one by Tom Baker.
Absolutely.
Another very 70s, 80s actor there. But Woodvine did a couple of, I found a couple of the ones he did. He did The Devil's Ape by Barnard Stacey, which is a fairly, in many respects, a fairly undistinguished story. I think he was they tended to farm out. Some of these stories were done, you know, it's like Freddie Jones got stories by H.G. Wells, and Jonathan Pryce got Saki, you know, certain writers, and I think Michael Bryant got M.R. James. And for some reason, I think John Woodvine tended to get you get all the other authors, you know, you get all the other authors, you know, stories, but there were stories by people like Philippa Pierce, who mainly wrote for young adults, but wrote some very good short supernatural stories, some very, very effective ones. But yeah, there's that, and there's the Yellow Cat by Michael Joseph, which is a great little ghost story. And if you're scared, if you're not keen on cats to begin with, this will really, this will not make you any fonder of them, I don't think.
Nice.
Yeah, so there's a nice kind of thing of an actor from that era being very much associated with the television and film of that era, kind of being folded into the and of course Woodvine was in one of the great horror films. Well, not just outside the hauntological time frame, but just into the early 80s. Of course, he was in American Werewolf in London. One of them.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Nice.
The idea of like refusing to explain, and the idea of liminality. And here's a third concept that I think really does resonate with me as being something from that period and something that makes a thing hauntological to me is your complicity in it. That you have to think, you have to pay attention, you have to figure things out on your own, you have to participate.
It's assuming you have a brain and are willing to use it. Of course, another one that definitely falls into this whole hauntological category. Another one we've discussed in the past, Penda Sven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It just kind of occurs to me an awful lot of the films that we've quite a few of the films we've discussed in the past are ones that would fall very readily into this.
That's true. I'll talk about a little bit more about History of the Occult. So it's a very Argentine film. It's set during a very specific era of Argentine history. But at the same time, it's also reinterpreting that history in much the same way that there's a fairly recent book that I bought on Audible called A History of Night, I think.
Okay.
And which is, again, interpreting Argentinian history through the lens of a family and their participation in it, and supernatural methodology, as opposed to, it's like there's normal evil, there's human evil, the evil that we know about, evil from South America generally, people being disappeared, people's children being stolen, fascism infiltrating everything from the top down and the bottom up, etc. Colonialism, the extirpation of the original indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
But then there's also this resonance of supernatural evil. And I think maybe it comes out of, being a Catholic nation. It's possible. And this sort of moment of post-Catholicism, when, you get a big infiltration of Marxism and therefore atheism at the same time.
Yes.
But this idea that, things are so bad, things are so awful, things are happening that are so weird and so black that it's like witchcraft. It's like brujeria. It's like, in A History of the Occult, what you figure out after a while is that there seems to be a Lovecraftian kind of intrusion from the outside, but there also seems to be almost Crowleyan black magic being used on the inside, and that their version of Buenos Aires may not even be inside the universe as we know it anymore. It might be in a pocket universe that was created by something that was done at some point, by some spell, some ritual, some, a pact between powers, and that they're living inside of this, and therefore that things can be brought into this pocket universe and that they can be removed from this pocket universe. There's a man whose dead body is found at the beginning, and on the news show, they're investigating who this man is. By the end of the film, you realize that he's a person that everyone in this narrative knew. He was part of their team. He was part of the news team, and he has been removed from the universe.
Well,
it's so completely that none of them remember him anymore.
Holy shit.
I know. And it's incredible. It's an incredible film. And but it takes you a long time to figure this out. It's not a long film, but it takes you a while to figure this out. And they are relying on you being able to figure this out. They are relying on you asking yourself consistently, okay, why am I being shown this? What's the point of X?
How does this connect to that?
Yeah, how does this connect to that? It's like, it's not...
Was what's what I've started to call the Skinamarink protocol. Because when Kate and I finally, as I said, I'd made one attempt to watch Skinamarink, it was kind of like I was trying to watch it like over my lunch, so I wasn't paying full attention. It was like very clear. Okay, you need to focus on this, and so we both agreed. Okay, all the lights out, put our phones away. We give this our undivided attention, and as we watched, I was sort of thinking, oh right, so I think that's supposed to mean that, and that's we were kind of like thinking aloud to make the connections, and that made the film. We found ourselves getting much more engaged with the film, and as I said, it has,
it makes it so much worse. It's
terrifying. I mean, as I said, it has its flaws. There were a couple there's a few long years, where it was a little bit too long for its own good. But there are sequences that are utterly terrifying.
Yes.
It's a uniquely unsettling experience, and definitely.
Yeah, and there's it's that weird thing of being frightened by an idea. It's like, and something has come into my head. Take it out. Take it out. Take it out. It's like, why did you make me think of that? So yeah, we circle back to the beginning, particularly with stuff like the apparition phase, where he's talking about, looking at ghost photos, and trying to figure out how a ghost photo has been faked, trying to figure out, and if it hasn't been faked, what are you actually seeing? And I think that has a lot to do with hauntology as well. It's like, from this angle it looks like this, from this angle it looks like this. It's almost like a Rorschach blot. Actually, one of the most hauntological things that I've seen recently is a movie called Rorschach that was made in I think 2014 or possibly 2015. It's on YouTube, and it's about a investigation by two guys, two paranormalists who come in. Actually, I think they think of themselves just as physicists, and they come in to investigate weird things going on in somebody's house. She's like, is it a ghost? Is it, and they're like, oh, no, I'm sorry. We're just here to measure it. We're not actually here to tell you what it is, because we don't know what it is. And and things just, they start out sort of quote, quote, normally supernatural, normal paranormal activity, but then getting bigger and bigger and odder and odder and odder. Completely worth your time. You should check it out. Anybody here should check it out.
There's another writer. I mean, definitely, if you can find these books, they're definitely worth reading. There's a man called David Hutchinson, and he's known in more recent years for writing the Europe in Autumn series. Set in a sort of near future and fairly dystopian Europe. But I first encountered him when I was a kid. Back in the 80s, I think at the age of 17, he had his first book published, a story collection called Thumbprints, and he followed up with another one called Torn Air. And there were a couple of others, but they were edging much more into science fiction, whereas the first couple, there's a strong element of super, and it's a very hauntological super. I mean, I don't, not deliberately, because he's just basically working. He was basically writing in that period. Yeah. And his stuff basically puts in a lot of those ideas. There's a lot of his kind of his stories revolve around the idea of these characters who discover what they call transplacement, which is basically teleportation, which of course has its own revolutionizing effect on society. But in the process, they encounter a ghost that tries to kill them.
That's great.
They do several of but there's several of these stories which Jimmy Singh and Neil Judson are the two main characters, and they run across a few different permutations of this. But to me, there's also stories with kind of a nearest future setting that also have a very supernatural. There's a wonderful story called Ace in the Hole, and it's about a guy who has this one particular talent, which is whenever you cut a deck of cards, he always picks an ace, which is not a particularly useful skill, except that a card game called Ace in the Hole springs up as he gets older. And the whole point is everyone just picks a card from the deck, and the winner, and whoever has the highest card wins, and aces are high. So of course he makes an absolute fortune on this. And then he's honest. And then in this future they have commercial submarines that can transport you from place to place. He's on board it, and there's a malfunction. I'm stuck under there, and the captain says, okay, there are 5 of us on board here, and with the oxygen we've got 5 people. will not live long enough for the rescue to arrive. However, 4 people could. How are we going to determine it? We cut cards, of course. And this woman who he's struck up a friendship with, but not possible early romance, he's told her this story, and she basically, kind of realizes that his skill has basically condemned him to death. And so when it gets to her turn, she just goes, "It's an ace," and you're never sure she's actually picked an ace or not, or if she's done this to sort of she's decided to sacrifice herself for this guy she doesn't really know. But I mean, this was written by a 17-year-old, and it's a very mature. Apart from that, and and after he's rescued, he realizes he's never even looked at his own card, and he looks at it. It's a queen. So one time that
wow,
a nice guy or anything. But there's also a wonderful. I can't remember what it's called, but there's this one where this guy, he's like the only individual left. Everyone else has become part of this Gestalt hive mind. Saying that there's a dominant gene for telepathy, and eventually something makes it kick in, and so all the minds on Earth are connected, merged into one. And he was like the only, and then he runs into one other person, and something happens. But yeah, he's like alone on the planet with his single. Wherever he goes, someone will pick him up if he's hitchhiking, or he goes to a hotel, and the receptionist, hello, Jack. It's a nightmare. So yeah, it's a lot of this stuff is very much has that very hauntological feel of it. There's the parapsychology, the sort of the blurred line between science and the supernatural, the paranormal. Very much of that, just because it was written by a new writer of its time. So if you can get hold of Thumbprints or Torn Air, I highly recommend them.
Okay.
They're just, a lot of them are just terrific short stories in any case, but they definitely have that hauntological vibe to them.
Yeah, exactly. So, are we talking about a genre? I think we're talking about a vibe more than a genre.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about
that's horror in many ways.
Yeah, exactly. Aesthetic is part of it, but it's not the whole thing.
Yeah. It's a lot of it. I mean, again, a lot of it is that a lot of hauntology is that indefinable feeling of possibility, of this idea that the world is so much more complex and strange than we can imagine, and that is not in a way that not that science understands, and not that traditional religion necessarily has posited either, but it's that strangeness is terrifying, but it's also rich in possibility. Those possibilities are frightening, and they're enthralling. They're potentially, potentially a step into something. It's unlike, say, Lovecraft, where all the stuff that lies behind the facade of what we know, or outside the very narrow circumscribed space of what we know, is like, oh God, it's horrifying. It's like, well, it's
could be, but it might not be.
Some of it might be, some of it isn't, some of it isn't, or it's frightening and optimistic. It's optimistic at the same time, and maybe that's a very valuable feeling for people to have, that things aren't just what they are, or don't just have to be as they are. That there are other ways of seeing and other ways of doing and being, which sounds a bit hippie-ish, I know, but
it sounds a bit hippie-ish, but it also reminds me of there's that the multiverse theory as filtered through Stephen King. There are other worlds than this. Yeah,
and there's that Le Guin thing of sort of of how a lot of it is about imagining other possibilities. The capitalism seems completely inescapable, and something which is just the natural order of things, which is no alternative. But that is how the divine right of kings once appeared, and people imagined otherwise.
Yes, exactly. That when people start to have different ideas, when people start to think about different things and go, well, wait a minute, things don't have to be the way that they always have been. At first, it's horrifying. it's very frightening because it's chaotic and abnormal, but then something shifts and it's infinite possibility. And I think when we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, you know, everything's nice, everything's normal, and then something's a little abnormal, and then it's horrifying, but it's also fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's, again, the people who you always, and this is possibly why the people who have always scared me most are the ones who are trying to enforce conformity, and the ones who don't, who seem to dislike an individual voice, anyone who doesn't who isn't in lockstep agreement with every single point. And unfortunately, it's not just the right wing who have that authoritarian tendency.
Not at all.
So many of these. And then there was a time when I started writing, I think I was kind of hoping I'd write stories that would send my readers out to kind of storm the barricades sort of thing. But these days, I'm much more interested in stuff that provokes kind of complicated and conflicted kind of responses. And it's just kind of like, I'm not here to preach a moral. What is this about? It's about 7,000 words long in the case of the story. And it is what it is. And you have to deal with that. You have to process that. And you have to come up with your own solutions. And I think, we need more people. We need people to have individual responses. We need people to have minds of their own. Not just become part of another kind of marching mass mind, because that's the kind of bullshit that gets us into trouble to begin with.
Well, it's true. I may love cults, but I hate cultishness.
Yeah.
Well, we've solved all the problems of the world now.
Fuckers, aren't we? So, I mean, have we left any hauntological works of fiction, art, cinema, music, television, whatever out? Then let us know.
Please.
Maybe we'll come back and do this shit again.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, Ghost Watch is on Tubi. Watch it.
Absolutely. There's a sort of later period bit of hauntology from the pen of the brilliant Stephen Volk, a writer whose stuff really, just not enough of that guy's stuff gets made into films or TV. Check that out. Check out Afterlife as well, the TV series.
Yes.
That fucking thing with Ricky Gervais. I hate Ricky Gervais. But the TV series with Andrew Lincoln and Leslie Sharp, which is just 2 seasons of some of the best television of the early 2000s.
I agree.
Seriously.
Absolutely.
So we will be back next time and to lower the tone of the conversation again and more interesting stuff to talk shit about. But until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
I've been Gemma Files, and this, of course, has been No Darkness.
Darkness.
But ours.
Ha ha ha.